Everyone, and this week's webinar through CHOA is Planning Your Depreciation Report Renewals and Implementation. And many thanks to Jeremy Bramwell from Strata Reserve Planning, who is going to walk us through all the steps. We have a number of questions already relating to depreciation reports, and we also are going to do, at the very end, I'll do a little update on the recent legislative amendments that have been posted by government under Bill 14 to give you an update and a bit of an idea of what's probably going to happen with those. As we go through the session today, I want to thank First Service Residential for their sponsorship of this event. And by all means, you go to their website if you're looking for management services. Here's Jeremy Bramwell's contact information, Strata Reserve Planning, client care at stratareserveplanning.com, and a direct number where you can get him, which I know he'll love that. So there you go. Again, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us. This webinar is recorded, as we do with all of our sessions, and will be posted to the CHOA website and the YouTube channel. If you submit a question through Q&A, I will scan them as we go through and group them into general questions towards the end, but you can also feel free to send your questions in directly to us as well. And remember, for your protection, this is a recorded session, so don't identify your Strata Plan business or personal information during the webinar. And speaker email addresses are obviously included, and you're invited to email the speakers directly if you have additional questions. So Jeremy, over to you, and if you need anything, I'll just kind of monitor along and change slides as we go along for you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm so glad to see that there's 256 people who want to learn about depreciation reports. Understanding the expectations of property ownership. So ownership is a community issue within the Act, and part of the Act is the Strata is responsible for maintaining the common property and the common assets. So that's pretty straightforward. That goes from everything from the envelope to the furniture in the lobby. So everything's included in that. How do we meet this expectation within the Act? You know, we have to create the annual budget and special levies if required, and if we have to go on past special levies, the loans or whatever, that is also part of what we have to figure out. If components are not renewed or replaced at the end of the lifespan, we also have to understand the financial implications of that, because that's very important. Deferral is one of the options, but it's the least preferable option that we have. So how much do we budget? Now, depreciation reports are long-term financial planning tools. That is their intent. They're there to help you with the cost of the maintenance, the cost of repairs, future maintenance, and future repairs. It helps us understand the financial implications that the Strata Council and the Strata Corporation have to go through to account for the costs as they come up. Now, next slide, Tony.
It got stuck.
This is how some Strata corporations, you know, they think that they're saving. It's kind of a nice little cartoon, but and we have it in all our presentations. But you know, that actually is the mindset of some Strata corporations. You know, let's roll the dice and see what happens. So you know, basically, what is a depreciation report? So it's actually a lot of things, but it's at its core, it's a legislated financial planning tool. So it identifies the life cycles of the common property and the common assets that the Strata Corporation must maintain and repair. You know, who's responsible for maintenance? What assets have they made? When they have to, you know, what is it going to cost? Who pays for it? All of these are questions that Strata Councils kind of wrestle with and the owners wrestle with. And we see this when we go to meetings, draft meetings all the time, is that, you know, the council, we did realize we were responsible for that. or, you know, so those things come up all the time. So the depreciation report itemizes that stuff, and then it allows the Strata Corporation to focus on the financial side down the road. So what's included? So basically, within a depreciation report, it's a common property, and that includes limited common property, because that's still common property, and the common assets that are responsibility of the Strata Corporation. Now, sometimes there's some stuff that will be outside of the strata lot that the owners have decided to take responsibility for. And to give you an example, somebody puts up maybe a TV antenna on the outside of a townhome. That's the Strata Corporation is not taking responsibility for that, so we just bypass it. Collectively, we refer to this the renewal assets of the Strata Corporation, or the components of the building. So choosing your depreciation report provider is actually very, very important. It's a bit of a wild west out there under the legislation. The essence of the legislation is whoever the Strata Corporation thinks is qualified is qualified. Now, if you're watching this presentation, you probably don't aspire to that philosophy. So I would say there's 5 things that you should know. First, understanding the competency of each type of provider and their limitations. Understanding the type of report that you're ordering. This is a big issue. Know the qualifications of the provider and the firm. They may be different. The person who looks at your property and the firm might have different expertise. Understanding the role of the depreciation report provider and that of the Strata Corporation as well, and understanding the data that the depreciation report provider requires, and that will be different depending on the type of Strata Corp building that you've got. Is it bare land, is it townhomes, or is it a high-rise? So competencies. My firm doesn't do high-rise. Engineers, builders, architects, or people who have a building background are the best qualified for high-rises. And that's because they have very complex operations. They've got chillers and, you know, different types of elevators, and they've got a lot of stuff in there that can be very complex. Also, the cost of changing components replacing components can change dramatically per floor. If you have a 10-floor high-rise and you've got a 30-floor high-rise, the cost of changing the windows differs because of the equipment that's required and the expertise that's required. So that's why we say stick to engineers, stick to builders, stick to architects, and stick to those who've got some kind of a building background. If you've got bare land, townhomes, low-rise buildings, you're an industrial strata complex, you don't really need an engineer. It's basic construction and technology. The pricing is fairly static if you're on 2 stories or 3 stories. So, you know, it's something that you have to realize, you know, like, what do I need? And within this, there's also a different cost structure. Engineers cost a lot more than a non-engineer, typically. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Now, after competencies, you have to understand the types of depreciation reports. Now, there's not a lot have been talked about this, but there's 2 types of depreciation reports. There's what we call engineered reports and functional. Now, engineered means that an engineer has done it, and there has been some type, or building technologist, or some type of invasive testing, cutting a hole in a wall, or maybe, you know, cutting a patch on the roof or whatever. So the testing has been invasive. We always recommend that only when you've got some kind of indicator of trouble, right? you want something tested. The functional report is the one that engineers and non-engineers typically do, and it's based on a visual inspection only. Give us the records, we'll visually inspect it, because you have to understand what we're preparing is a financial budgeting document. So we're not going to get in there and do a lot of that. And so that's it. The next thing you have to look at is the qualifications of the provider. So when I say qualifications, not only of the company, but of the planner. So request the actual qualifications, designation, and experience. I'm not going to get into discussing the different designations because it's quite a controversial issue, but I will say talk to the company, find out what their qualifications are, what their liabilities insurance is. And the planner, the person who's actually going to sign your report as they inspected the property, and make sure that the person inspecting the property is the guy actually signing the report. So ask what their qualifications. Get references. You know, you're going to be spending a fair amount of money. What's really good is to get a sample of the report. Now, if you're going to, I really encourage people, if they're going to get a quote, to maybe get 2 or 3 quotes, just like you would on any service, and get 2 or 3 sample reports and just compare them against each other and just see what you're most comfortable with as a strata. Now, the role of a depreciation report planner. This is a very, this issue is very close to my heart. Our job is to read the documents that we're given, to analyze them, to identify the common property and assets that are the responsibility of the Strata Corporation. Sometimes this means identifying what's not part of the component list. It's to measure and count the components and assets that must be included in the report. Within every depreciation report should be what we call a benchmark report, which lays out what, you know, how many doors, how big the complex is. For example, if you've got a building, a wood frame building with 40 units, there should be 40 suite doors, and there should be different kinds of doors for the service doors. And if you've got the common room, there's some more doors in there. So, like, how many doors do you have? You know, how much siding do you have? You might have 40 or 50,000 square feet of siding. That's something that should be in the report visible. We have to inspect the property to complete the analysis. When we do come to inspect the property, we need to have availability. We need to be able to go into all the service rooms. We need to be able to go through a couple of the suites, not to look at the suite, but to get to the balconies. These are the things. So when we're inspecting the property, we need full access. And finally, the fourth one is we have a responsibility to attend a draft meeting. Now, not every contract calls for a draft meeting, but I would really recommend it. One of the big issues that comes up at draft meetings is you give us, or we find information on a component, and let's say it's painting. And we say that the painting was done in 2015, and you come back and you say, no, it was done in 2017. Well, that's 2 years, and that really does change the financials. So the draft meeting is a place where we can go. You can read the report before we get there, and you can tell us where we're wrong, or there's a grammar or whatever, and that can just all be fixed up. So the final report is not, it doesn't have any errors. It's already been vetted once. So the Strata Council also has a role in all this. If you want us to read all these documents, you have to put them together for us. Our role is is to tell you what we need. Your role is to get them all together and give them to us. Sometimes that's done through a property manager. Within the Strata Council, there should be a contact that the provider can contact. Usually, we do like usually to be a sole, like one person that we can contact, arrange the inspection, ask for the questions in the draft meeting. We also like a number for the treasurer if there's a financial question. Finally, to hold the draft meeting. And when I say hold the draft meeting, I do mean in a timely manner. If we get the report to you, most providers like the draft meetings to be within 7 to 21 days after, so they can close the file and everybody can move on. Okay, so how do we analyze the components? So there's basically 2 types of components in a building. There's what we call the age defined. So age defined is like painting. Every 10 years, you're gonna go and paint. That's pretty well static. The other one is allowances or contingencies. And what an allowance contingency is that it's going to last the life of the building, and it's like the foundation. You're not going to, in an apartment building, you're not going to lift up the building to replace the foundation. But the foundation and some other issues, some other components within the building may need to be have some repairs along the way. So we include allowances within depreciation report. But within age, but this category, this page of the slides covers everything. So we evaluate the component, the condition of the asset as much as we can. Pipes, we really can't do it because we don't have access. We determine the effective lifespan of the assets. And that may not be the same as a chronological. The effective age is what condition are they in. Then we estimate the remaining economic life of the asset. We determine the renewal cost of the component of the asset today, and then we project the cost into the future. So it's, let's say it costs $10,000 today, you increase it at 3% over 10 years, you're going to get to about $16,000 to $17,000 in 10 years. And that's why in a depreciation report, if you look at something, the replacement cost in the chart is always much greater down the road. Okay, documents. We always will ask for documents. There's a large set of documents that can be given to the Depreciation Report Planner. Now, the list of documents changes based on the type of building that you're in. The more complex the building, and I'm talking about high-rises, there'll be more documents. You get to bare lands, not so much. We'll ask for a bunch of documents, but if you don't have the documents, work with the provider if they're not available. It's very common that if we don't have documents, we have to have more of a, I guess, an oral history from people on the council that have that background. So the first set of documents are financial. It is a financial document in the end. So list of all major work done in the past 5 years. List of all work that you're planning to do in the next 5 years. Copies of quotes that you have anything in the immediate future. Strata Corporation financials for the last 2 to 3 years. And also AGM notices the results for the last couple of years. This can be really good because it gives us an idea of what's happening in the strata. The discussions that happen at AGM can give us a bit of an insight what's going on. If you have any leases for equipment or assets, that's always good because, of course, want to look at those leases to see what the strata is actually responsible for. Because, and I'll give you an example, on some entry phones on low-rise buildings that are leased, they're maintenance free. So there is no maintenance cost included in that. So that would not be something that'd be in the depreciation report. We also ask for a lot of non-financial documents. The building plans are the #1 thing we ask for. Strata plans are nice, but my background is appraisal for nearly 30 years, and I can tell you what a strata plan is. A strata is essentially an air parcel. So when they design the plans, they're approximately the right size for the exterior envelope, but they're not exactly. Also, there's a lot of things that are not in a plan, and in a strata plan that we want to see in a building plan. So building plans are something we always look for. If you don't have them and you ask your provider to go get them, we can go down to City Hall and get them. We usually scan them, and that's usually an extra charge. The bylaws of the Strata Corporation, that's important. Registered easements and covenants. We've done bare land stratas where you have strata A on one side, strata B on the other side, and there's a street coming up. And they were quite surprised to learn that these stratas own the road coming up. And they had no agreement on how to cover costs. And the road was in disrepair because they didn't even know they owned it. So that's, you know, surprises occur. If there's any legal opinions, anything went to CRT, court, that's something we need to know, because it usually will affect the financial, there's usually a financial issue somewhere in there. Airspace parcel agreements, again, this is usually related to high-rises. Any environmental engineering reports, consulting reports for roofs, elevator, envelope, and former depreciation reports. So these are all things that if you give to us, it'll give us a much better idea of what we're dealing with. Sections is a very interesting thing in the depreciation report world. Now, as most of you are probably aware, sections are created through the bylaws of a strata corporation. So you'll have, very typical, you'll have the commercial section below, you'll have the residential section above, and you'll have a common use section in the parking where everybody has access. The way that those are set up, there's a council for each one of those. So when the cost allocation is really important in the bylaws and how we work that. We assume that the bylaws are enforceable unless we have a legal opinion to the contrary. We don't want to get into situations where councils are going, no, we didn't mean that. We have to have some set of rules. These are separate legal entities, and it's really recommended that each strata corporation commission their own depreciation report. Our particular point of view as a firm is that unless we're doing the whole building, we don't do one section. There's a reason for that, is that if you have 3 firms do 3 sections in the same building, you may end up with different costs, different lifespans, and different condition assessments, which it just makes a mess. How do we, you know, the experience of the inspector is critical, and this is why we talked about this a little bit earlier. The strata documents and records may tell us, let's say that we'll take the painting on the wall was done in 2015. In this example, we have a building from 2005. We have to assume that in 2020, everything's 15 years old, right? There's a history of asset renewals, roofing, elevators, domestic water. They may have an emergency generator system. These may have gone under, renewal programs along the way. I hope the elevator has. And this kind of information should be in operation plans, general meetings, council meetings. Again, I can't emphasize this enough, is the role of the Strata Council to dig these documents out for the provider, not our role to hunt. If we have to go through it, we have to charge extra for time. And that's just the way it is. One of the biggest things we get as providers is, when we go to a draft meeting, is no, it's not going to cost that much money. So when we talk about replacement costs, people always ask us, where do we get these costs from? So we have published cost estimates. There's geographic issues. We've done properties in Prince Rupert. So when we went to Prince Rupert, we had to provide an inflationary factor to our costing. Unique considerations to a property. And that will give you an example there. The building may be on a slope, a significant slope at a ski resort. These kinds of working on slopes and things like that add costs. And then there's current market conditions. Some of you may be interested to know that the cost of construction for wood frame townhomes actually declined very recently, while concrete went up. And that's because there was a downturn in the new condo market for townhomes, and the volume of construction dissipated for a while. So we use a variety of these tools to determine the most accurate estimates. But things change, and every 3 years when we come back, we'll reassess what the inflationary rate is for construction and what the costs are for the different components. The goal of a depreciation report is to provide a budget for you and your strata. Now, one of the biggest important and most important issues is determining the financial health of your strata. So once we identify all the assets and include all the costs and the budget for the next 30 years, we then start our modeling. So BC is the only jurisdiction in North America that I know of that requires 3 funding models for a strata corporation. All other jurisdictions have 1. We have a 30-year cycle here. Some other provinces have 25. I think 30 actually works much better because it captures the full length of some of the components. It is recommended that for one of the models, you get the fully funded model within the report. So the reason we get the fully funded is it helps us understand and calculate reserve adequacy, which is the internationally accepted way of measuring the financial strength of a strata corporation. It helps you understand the financial implications regarding renewal or deferral, and emphasizing why you should get special levies when you do. So the benchmark model, or the fully funded model, is when you have the goal of keeping your reserve fund at or near 100% funded. That means that the strata corporation is adhering to a simple and responsible principle: replace what you use up. The thing is that most strata corporations in British Columbia are not fully funded. They're nowhere near it. And I want to say this here: I do not expect anybody to become fully funded. It would just be too stressful on any strata corporation in British Columbia. But what I would say is this is the model for fully funded. So the blue line represents a one-time large special levy that you would pay to bring you up to where you should be if you were fully funded, and then you pay a static contribution on an annual basis for the projected period of 30 years. In other words, it's stable. Reserve adequacy is can be measured as cash on hand. So it's a ratio of what your actual or projected reserve fund is over what it would be if you were fully funded. So that's why you need to know what your reserve fund would be if it was fully funded. And it's expressed as a percentage. This ratio provides an indication of the ability of the Strata Corporation to adequately cover the expenses at any time. Next slide. So the targets that are out there, and these targets are, globally accepted, I guess is the best way of putting it. So if you have a reserve adequacy between, above 70%, you're financially strong, low probability of special levies, really a highly desirable development. It's considered to be strong. Strata corporations with a reserve adequacy of 35 to 70% are considered average and should have periodic special levies to meet its financial obligations. Strata corporations with a reserve adequacy that are below 35% are considered critical on international standards and can expect loans or multiple special levies. Now, this is the financial target of what we like to see. This is from an actual complex we did in 2015. Our goal was to move them up. And you're looking at that and you're going, wow, they had 6%. But among people in the depreciation report business, the average range for strata corporations within British Columbia is between 10 to 25%. So British Columbia is, on international standards, is critical. There are some strata corporations we've done that are above that, but we have not been funding strata corporations in British Columbia to a sufficient amount to make them to the point that special levies are not needed. Special levies are always needed in British Columbia. They are just a fact of life. The goal of a depreciation report should give you a funding plan that there's less special levies by increasing the reserve adequacy. Should you have a report done? Well, some people think I'm a bit biased here. We should, always. It tells us about our inventory of assets and their conditions, when they need to be replaced and the cost it's going to cost, and the recommendations on how to pay for it. Because the truth is that there's only 4 ways that you can pay for things. You can pay in monthly contributions, you can pay in special levies. And I think that's actually, we actually have it on another slide. And I'll get to that in a minute. Depreciation, planning really works, but you have to understand what you have here. So the depreciation report is a long-term planning, financial planning tool. That's what it is. An operations report, which I believe is coming up next week, is an annual planning tool. The depreciation report feeds in to the annual planning tool. Now, we often get asked about a maintenance And there's a lot of confusion between a depreciation report and a maintenance manual. A maintenance manual is there to help you maximize the lifespan of the existing building components. So, for example, how to keep your boiler going for the projected lifespan, how to maintain other operational assets. Those are all in the maintenance manual if you're in a bigger complex. Like I said, if you're in a really tiny complex, an operations report in a maintenance manual may not be around. But, you know, you should work to having all three. The larger the complex is, you should work to having all three of these. They all provide a different skill set to managing the building. Yes. Why is planning critical? Planning allows you to anticipate future events and develop a strategy, you know, to meet those events. It gives you time. I can tell you as an appraiser for nearly 30 years that if you don't plan, we've seen many developments. I remember the 90s. I was involved in providing assistance to the Appraisal Institute of Canada on how to value grow-ups. If you know, these were events that damaged buildings and owners because they weren't properly prepared. You've got to plan in the future. The biggest benefit is having, you got enough money to proceed. Money, there's a cost to money. The cheapest money is the monthly contributions. Then we get into special levies. That's a moderate cost. Yes, they're painful, but if you pay more in monthly contributions, your special levies should be less. Then we get to a point where it begins to get really expensive, and you have to borrow money. You get a loan to do your roof because there's not enough money in the CRF, and the owners won't contribute enough in special levies, or they can't. Sometimes, you know, you are in a development where there's a lot of seniors, and they're just sitting there and going, you know, we don't have $35,000. So, you know, but, you know, there is a cost of borrowing money. The most expensive is deferral. If you defer, it just gets really expensive. The cost of deferral is 3 to 5 times the cost of doing the repairs at the end of the lifespan. So, and we see this so many times. The new cost of deferral is actually, I can't get an insurance policy, right? Or they won't fully insure me. That's the new cost of deferral. There was a certain building here in town, I can't discuss more about it, but they couldn't get insurance because they didn't listen to their insurance company and replace the roof. They promised the insurance company multiple times they would replace the roof. They didn't. And finally, the insurance company said, come back when you've got a contract to replace the roof. So this happens. One of the greatest benefits that councils love is CRFs give them a lot more flexibility. Depreciation reports give them a lot more flexibility. They now have a majority vote. When you don't have a depreciation report, it's 75% vote to contribute to the CRF, to make recommended, to go and spend money. Special levies. You've got problems getting the money if you need it in emergency. Once you get a depreciation report, those items that are listed within the depreciation report, you now only need a majority vote. It allows a lot better management within strata corporations. And we run into this all the time, where there's a certain group within the strata corporation who don't want anything done, or they don't, they don't want to increase the contributions to the CRF. And then once the depreciation report comes, that group no longer has the ability to block the maintenance that REIT's required within the building. Time is one of the most valuable assets for a strata corporation. It always has been. A strata corporation is like a business. You've got money coming in, you've got expenses going out, you've got a management committee that's running the whole thing. You can plan for repairs. You can create that budget. You can start that planning process 2 to 3 years before a major project, and you can identify the project consultants. There's nothing worse than you having to go to a project that you don't know that's coming up and not getting the consultants that you want because you don't have the time, or they're not available because they weren't told that you need assistance. A few years ago, when they could have put you into their timeline, because not everybody's instantly available all the time. So what is the role of the council once you have your depreciation report? To reference it, to review the inventory of the depreciation at council meeting. You're going to have significant costs coming up that arise in the next 5 to 15 years. And I'll give you an example. Many buildings have a roof coming up. Everybody remembers that the roof was put on 10, 15 years ago, not realizing in the next 15 years they're needing another one. So this is something, you got to plan. It identifies those components that need servicing and inspection all the time. And I'll give you an example. If you have a swimming pool, you're going to have pumps, and those pumps are going to have pump motors, and you're going to have sand filters. Well, those are things you got to keep on top of, right? You've got, you got to annually update the list. One of the big things when you have a depreciation report is that you're going to update the components, you're going to renew them, you're going to do maintenance, or you're going to, you're going to paint the wall again or whatever. You keep track of those and give them to the depreciation report planner next time, so the report will be a much faster project. And you are identifying costs that go out a long way. But I think most people are just focused on the next 10 years, but you also want to think what's going on in the next 30.
Okay, well, here we are. Thanks, Jeremy. There's a load of questions, but just before we jump into those, I just want to give everybody a little wee bit of an update on Bill 14. It's important to know that the objective of the bill, as this is trying to address a number of insurance issues, is to enable future changes to the Strata Property Act and the regulations. So if and when Bill 14 passes, it's through second reading, it is at committee level, it will go into third reading shortly. When it does pass, you won't see any immediate changes to the Strata Property Act. Now, there'll likely be a period of public consultation on proposed changes, and those are going to probably be things like, will there be a change to the mandatory requirements of depreciation reports? Will there be changes to the mandatory requirements of funding? How will there be changes to disclosure around depreciation reports for the public? It's also important to remember that depreciations are a significant disclosure tool to potential buyers. So when a potential buyer is requesting an information certificate, that tool also is going to be used with respect to assessing the condition and the value of the building. So there are a number of anticipated changes that we'll see over the next 6 months to a year. As strata corporations, my recommendation is pay attention to the information, any public consultation that is basically set out by government as they're trying to assess what to do, and anticipate that the regulations will take effect. The purpose of using the method, the regulatory method for changes, is provides government with a lot more flexibility, and it enables changes quicker when they're doing through regulations. They don't require that the legislature debate them and pass them through a bill at that point. It's then a matter of provincial cabinet simply approving new regulations as we move forward. So when you see Bill 14, you will see it often refers to, or will often say, subject to the regulations. Excuse me. So those are basically what's going to be taking place with Bill 14 as we move forward. So questions, Jeremy, we have loads of questions. I'll just kind of start with them. Here's the first one. So when should a new strata consider when to do their first report? So if they're a 10-unit Bearland strata and they've just been open for a year, what's the right kind of window? But so answer that first, and then let's answer if you're a 50-unit mid-rise or a 100-unit high-rise, when should you get your first report done?
Well, my general philosophy about depreciation reports and CRF funds is the same as a registered education savings plan. You should get them done as soon as you can. Now, the truth be told, with a Bearland strata, if we're just talking about the road and the curbs, those components will last a bit of a while before anything's done. But I still would get it done, sooner than later. Especially because we find in Bearlands, there's stuff that you don't realize there. Usually, if you've got wood fencing, that's something that has a limited life. You can have parks, and then you've got playgrounds. So, when you say we're just a Bearland strata, kind of look around and see what you got, because that can make a big difference. But I would say if you're a typical Bearland strata, probably the first 5 or 6, maybe give it 5 years, and then start planning. Now, if you're an improved building, and what I mean by that is a townhome or apartment building or something bigger, I would start right away. The big issue is that when the developer does his budget, it's woefully inadequate. It's always woefully inadequate. It doesn't matter who the developer is. So I would start around at your first AGM to start talking about it, because you remember, the bigger the development, the more components that you're going to have. You may love anything with a clubhouse you can just add 20 to 40 components in a clubhouse. So, the more components you have, the earlier you should start. It's kind of the best way that I would put it. But I would say anybody in an apartment or a high-rise, get to it right away. Because the last thing, if you leave it to 5, 10, 15 years, what you're going to find is a lot of nasty special levies. Because what happens is you start off with the developer's contribution, and then, you increase it at 2 or 3% per year, when maybe you should be increasing it at 5. And, 10, 15 years down the road, you know, you're beginning to look at roofs, windows, doors, everything, all that stuff within your depreciation report period, and that stuff gets critically expensive. And next thing you know, you've got a lot of special levies. So you want to start earlier, minimize your special levies.
Great, thank you. So what if our annual budget includes routine maintenance of common areas and that we do annually? So our Strata, the Strata who's asking the question, our Strata Corporation includes in our annual budget one building every year to redo the carpeting or carpeting maintenance, and we repaint all the hallways. Those are items that we do as part of our annual budget, but our depreciation planner has put it into our depreciation report. So how should we deal with that?
Okay, so there's two parts to that. The first part is your depreciation report planner is actually correct. Because the Act says we have to put in anything that's not done on an annual basis. So painting and new carpeting is not replaced in the whole complex every year. You're doing a portion of it. The best way to handle that, because it does have to go into the report, is in the replacement history or some other section like that for that component, there should be a note saying that this component is taken out of the operating fund, and that's how you would handle it. That's the only way it can be done, you know, within the standards. You can't just get rid of it. So that would be the answer to that one.
Okay. Next question, you'll like this one. Our depreciation report included 20 pages that did not belong to our building. We requested that the planner correct the report and remove the documents, which he did, but then he sent us a bill for $1,200 to correct the report.
Okay, so again, a two-part answer. First, you didn't get a draft meeting, because if you had got a draft meeting, you would have seen that there was another 20 pages, hopefully at that time. So that's, you know, why you get draft meetings. But don't pay the bill. I mean, why would you pay the bill for someone to clean up their own error, right? Like, I think that's fair.
Totally. Well, and this also goes to the question, though, of when you retain or when you're looking for proposals, it's oftentimes much easier for the Strata to create a small request for proposals. And when you're getting into a contract with a planner, make sure some of those details are in the contract. If there are errors, the errors are to be corrected by the depreciation planner at no cost. You may also want to be looking at what the fixed cost is for the report after everybody's done an assessment of, you know, what the proposals are. So, you know, it's a part of resolving this problem is preventing it in the first place from having a good contract with the planner that you're working with.
Yeah, most depreciation report planners work on a fixed cost. There are, you know, our contracts are fixed cost. They do have an hourly provision in it if you want additional services. For example, if you want us to go stand in line at City Hall to get plants, we'll charge you, but, you know, we're going to charge you the time because that's not included in a typical contract. So, but yeah, it's you know, you should have a contract. I would read, you know, our proposals are nearly 20 pages, so, you know, read, understand what you're getting into.
Okay, when should we plan our 3-year update? In the 3rd year after the report is ready, or the 4th year?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. So the effective date of a depreciation report is always the first day of a fiscal year. So if you are getting the 3rd year renewal, what we typically recommend is that as we're coming to the end of that 3rd year, that it be in the budget so we can go and inspect and complete the renewal and get at least the draft to you at least 30 days before your AGM. So you can include it in your AGM package, or you can at least have the budgeting for the recommended contributions within the new budget.
Here's one that deals with secondary costs. So all the secondary costs included in estimating major projects. If we're looking at a major project or replumbing our building, do the secondary costs that are projected by the planner include things like taxes, the cost of consultants, building permits, insurance costs? Are any of those things included, or is it just an estimate of what the actual construction would be?
Okay, so depreciation report standards that are out there, and the CRP training, all is that the replacement costs should include the demolition cost, the construction costs of the new components, as well as the taxes and everything. Now, when we get into project management costs, typically that will not be included, except maybe within engineering, because it's hard for us to know, one, if you're going to have a project manager look after the project, and two, which firm you're going to use, what percentage they're going to charge. Again, project management typically only occurs when you get into much larger projects, much larger buildings, and again, they're you know, if you're doing a restoration of because you've got water leaks or, you know, that sort of thing, there's big project management fees. In high rises, there tend to be higher project management fees. So we typically stay away from that.
Okay, super. So there's two questions here that are legal issues relating to the Act, and I might dive in and do them. Do you still require a 3/4 vote if there's a special levy, even if it is a depreciation report? And the answer is yes, which is why we encourage people to fund their contingency funds, because the contingency contributions, as Jeremy said, it's only a majority vote for any value that you contribute as part of your annual budget. But when you have a recommended repair, which will lead into another question that helps, when you have a recommended repair, it is only a majority vote to approve the funds from the contingency for the recommended repair. So these are amendments that the government made to the legislation over the last 3 years that basically make it easier for you to save and easier for you to spend the funds when they're necessary to be able to do maintenance and repairs. The other question that relates to this is, our depreciation report recommends the replacement of our roof in 2023, but we discovered we had to replace it this year in 2020 after we had a roofing inspection done. Remember that the depreciation report is an estimate. They're going to be estimate of timelines. And one of the things which we'll talk about next week is your operation plan. At what point are you looking at major components and trying to define them and basically reassess them to see what their ongoing condition is? And maybe that means being able to extend their life under some circumstances, but it may also mean that the life is not as long as what anyone had inspected. So the difficulty Strata struggle with is, at what point do we do this? The Act didn't set out conditions for recommended. It only said if a repair is recommended in the depreciation report. It didn't say anything about timelines. So I think sometimes strata corporations are in a situation that if the timeline is extremely out in the distance, you might want some legal services to see if you actually have the ability to spend your contingency funds. But put it from the perspective of the owners. If you have $700,000 in the bank and your roofing renewal is $500,000, what chances do you think that the owners are not going to be willing to approve a contingency expense by majority vote? And they'd rather pay for a special levy of $500,000. It's probably not likely either way. So, you know, as you're doing this, this is the whole purpose of a depreciation report. The funds are there as projects are needed to be repaired, replaced, renewed. And the benefit is it's a majority vote as you go through them. It's a significant difference as you move forward. Here's a question for you, Jeremy. If energy upgrades become mandatory through local governments and through the province, which are being discussed, how are those costs going to be estimated by depreciation planners?
Okay, again, this is a two-part question. One, we have to do depreciation reports based on a bunch of assumptions. One of the assumptions is like for like. We replace like for like. So if you have asphalt shingle roof, we're going to replace it with an asphalt shingle roof. When you start requesting changes, we can do that. Now, if legislation comes in that requires retrofitting, we can put that into a depreciation report. And let's say, you know, something comes up and you legislative have to put it in 2021. We would put the component year of acquisition in 2021 and cost it out. But the issue is I really wouldn't worry about it right now, because as with most government issues, the retrofitting, they usually grandfather most stuff. I would wait to see what comes out in the legislation. We'll wait to see what comes out. But on a general basis, it's like for like.
That's great. I think we've covered the lion's share of all of the questions. One of the questions that comes up a few times, though, and that we've been emailed about the same question, is we've used the same engineer for our last two reports and have been basically satisfied with the report. We're coming up to our third report now in year 9. Should we consider looking at other parties to get a different view of our building?
This is kind of an interesting question. Should you change your provider? Now, if you're using an engineer and you've had an engineer do it the next year, I'm going to make the assumption that you're in a high rise. What I would be more focused on is that you want to start looking at the report and making sure that you can measure the financial health of your strata corporation. And the reason that this is going to become more and more important is as depreciation reports become mandatory. I can tell you as an appraiser that the credit unions and the banks are looking at the reports. And they're not happy because they're not comparable. So I think that the trend in the next 5 years is going to be to work towards comparability of reports within the industry, because the consumers yourselves are going to demand it. So I really, you know, changing firms, if you want a different point of view, that's purely, you know, a view that you guys have to take. What I may suggest is, if you want to do that, is look at a few depreciation reports from different firms, just like you would if you were looking around, and see if how they do the report is something that you may want to look into at your next one. Because I hate to say it, but it's a bit of the Wild West right now. And it is very difficult to compare one firm against another.
Okay, super. So just a few little follow-up notes for everyone before we shut off for the day. How do we share these presentations with the rest of our council members and owners? When we're done, this session is recorded. Both the PowerPoint and the session itself are posted to the CHOA website later today for public access, and they are on the YouTube channel. And feel free to have your owner's link onto them, connect them, share them. It's a great resource to pass around to your community and other neighboring communities. A few people have asked a question about managing your finances in your Strata Corporation, and there's quite a few details about loans. I think it's a great idea. We're going to schedule a session that deals with managing your financial assets, investments, and being able to negotiate loans. So we can get all of those things set up as well. You can register for next week's session at noon tomorrow. A notice gets sent out and it gets posted to the CHOA website right away. We're going to be talking about taking your depreciation report and putting it into an operations plan to be able to use it for annual funding and also for long-term funding of your contingency reserve. So we'll touch a little bit on financial management at that point as well. Again, just want to say thanks, Jeremy, for your time. It was just really helpful for people. The responses are really excellent. As well, thanks for service for their support this week, and especially thanks to BC Housing and to the Housing Policy Branch for all the work they've been doing and for their support for the community. It's made a big difference in the last 6 months as we've been going through all of the challenges. So thanks so much to everyone for your participation today. And at this point, we'll end the session, and in a couple hours, you'll see the session posted onto the website. So thanks for joining us this afternoon, and bye for now. And bye, Jeremy.
Bye, Tony. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Okay.